So I've just done my first quick study project, which was to learn Chopin's posthumous nocturne in C sharp minor in 2 weeks and perform it at an online concert for my piano meetup group. Now, I'm going to share some of what I learned in this project in this video, and also how this might influence some of my future quick studies, because overall this was a very positive experience and it's certainly something that I'm going to be doing more of. So overall, I was really surprised as to how well I ended up knowing the piece after just 2 weeks of working on it. And this was really down to the very focused way in which I was forced to practice, given the time constraints. Now, I only spent probably a maximum of 20 minutes each day practicing the piece, and certainly the average would have been less than that, because life happens. There were some days where I wasn't able to play as much, but that's very realistic when one is working on something like this alongside everything else that one has to do. And there were a few days where I would do something like I'd practice the piece in general for, say, 10, 15 minutes, and then maybe later on the day just spend 5 minutes focusing on a specific exercise or spot. It was also quite a nice way to practice if I didn't have a big chunk of time to allocate. And so when I actually got to playing the piece, it came as a surprise to me how comfortable I felt with it, given that I was aware that I'd only spent 2 weeks on it. The other thing that was very useful was the sort of gradually building up towards different milestones. So the first phase was learning the notes and then just playing it through for myself and seeing where it fell apart, needed a bit more work, while also starting to consider how I could make it a bit more musical. Then I played it in a lesson where there was third-party feedback, so the pressure is a bit more increased and the focus is more on refining than just learning the notes. And then the concert where there's obviously a whole lot of people listening and you want to do the piece some justice. I think overall, while there were a few messy bits in the concert, a few things that I think could have come off a bit better, given the 2 weeks that I had, it worked pretty well. And overall, it was well received. And I guess people at these kinds of things are generally very, very encouraging and positive. But on a personal level, I enjoyed playing it, which I guess is one of the most important things. And I think I did it a measure of justice. There are a few passages and things where I just think, you know what, with a few more days and a bit more practicing, those would be a lot more robust or more likely to come off properly. But otherwise, on the whole, it worked really, really well. Now, what I noticed in the concert, though, was pretty much what I expected, in that there were bits of the piece where I hadn't given them much attention because I'd been focused on more difficult bits, and I probably should have given them more. So, for example, the opening, I think it really needed a bit more work, just given how it's so exposed, and even though technically it's not difficult, you really do want to there's a number of musical things that one wants to get right. So I would, for example, the first practice things like making sure that the first time the opening comes up, there's a sort of a contrast between that and when the chords are repeated in the next two bars. So I don't think I made enough of that. I think I botched the pedal a little bit, and the voicing could have been better. So there's a bit of practicing I'll do there. So for example, I could practice it with some tapping to get the voicing. So something like this. Kind of a thing would work well there. Some of the faster runs could use a little bit more work. There were one or two that were slightly unstable. And that I could just practice with the chaining that I've shown in one of the previous videos. I think that would get it quite nicely. The transitions between sections were not as good as they could have been, but they were not terrible, but I could still practice those a bit more. So I think I mentioned in one of the videos that I was working on the transition from the A to the B section, which happens in bar 20. So I'd practice that more. And not go on much, just keep on drilling that before going on. Then the B section, just a bit more work on that in general, because I didn't work on that much at all. I also had some wrong rhythms when I'd learnt it that threw me a bit when I was playing, because it's amazing how the habits that you form early on stick. I still think it's sort of Murphy's law. It's like the things that you learn that are wrong stay with you the longest, and the things that are right seem to need a lot more enforcement. I don't know if that's true. It's maybe just perception. I'd certainly, I think it actually did work, but I did feel a bit jittery in this. Once again, it's just a case of a bit more practice, and it should be all right. Then there's an interesting thing, the leggero passages that come in, or the grace notes that come in bar 58 is quite interesting, because one of the things I mentioned as a benefit of the quick studies is that they expose you to more music and styles, and then that in turn allows you to develop more technique and become a more holistic pianist. Now, interestingly, a lot of the music that I play at the moment very rarely calls for the light or leggero touch. So I'm generally, something like this, the runs, I would be practicing, I would do it with a sort of very heavy fingers into the keys kind of approach. But actually what's called for here is a very different style. And so in my lesson, what Graham showed me was an approach to coming at this from the complete opposite direction, where what you do is you play with almost like an exaggerated staccato touch, with the arm weight taken out of the hand, and where you play it so lightly that some of the notes don't sound. It seems counterintuitive. And then slowly but surely increase the pressure, and you can take away the exaggeration of the staccato touch, and then you get something. I'm sorry, my hands are very cold, so I'm struggling a bit with that. But then you get something like that, and it wasn't it's not as consistent as I would like it to be. So it didn't come off perfectly in the concert. But I did notice after practicing it a little bit like that I was able to sometimes get a really like shimmering sound that was really lovely, which I think is exactly what Chopin was going for there. So I don't think that's something I would have been exposed to, certainly not on some of the pieces that I'm learning now. And it's not a touch or a style that I've used for years. So I think that was one of the positive outcomes of this. So this was overall a very positive exercise, and one that I'm certainly going to be doing more of in future. There are many benefits to it, the most important being that now not only do I have a new piece in my repertoire, but it's a piece that I've always wanted to play and that I'm going to get a lot of joy from playing on many occasions in future. So that by itself is really worthwhile. Then the other thing is that I think I learned quite a lot about how to approach learning a piece, even though I guess it was more around forming good habits and being more disciplined. And because the outcome of this was so positive in that I was able to play something that I enjoyed and in a short space of time and get such a good outcome or benefit from my efforts, it's really inspiring in terms of making me want to follow or adopt really good habits in terms of learning in a disciplined way. It's really hard, I guess when we go about learning something, it's really hard to be disciplined all the time. But this has really shone a light to what the consequences of being lazy are. Most of the places where things went wrong or where I wasted time were places where I had just not really been very focused. And then when things really worked well, and I was pleasantly surprised by the results, it was the things where I had the greatest discipline and a more strategic, logical approach. So I think overall it's really good in terms of just reinforcing good habits and encouraging or inspiring one to develop those habits. In terms of the level of the piece chosen, I also felt that this was a really good level for me, and that this will vary from person to person. But what worked for me with this is that there were some things that were challenging, particularly given the time frame. But overall, the piece wasn't too long, and I was able to enjoy playing it in that there were quite a few moments where I wasn't just thinking, oh gosh, how am I going to get through this, or how is that going to come out? I could just really just sit back and immerse myself in the music, which is really what I want to be doing. So this has also challenged me in terms of the levels of pieces that I play in concerts in general, in that it's great to have challenges every so often, but just about everything that I was doing was challenging. And I can't say that I always enjoy that. I find it quite fraught. And so I'm definitely going to be looking at pieces like this, or at this level, a lot more in future. The length was also quite good, and just going through the repertoire now, I find there's so many pieces that I really, really want to play that are of a similar length and difficulty. It's amazing when you start opening your mind to possibilities beyond just something that's sort of a stretch from where you are in terms of the technical difficulty. It's amazing just how much you spot that becomes accessible. So some of the pieces I'm going to look at, there's a Brahms intermezzo that is, I think it's set at Royal Schools Grade 8, but it's also 3 pages, and it's probably something that I could reasonably learn within a similar time frame with a similar approach. Might need maybe just a little bit more time than on this one. But then also I'm going to look at some other style periods as well. I haven't played anything by Mozart for ages, so there's a Mozart sonata that I'm going to learn that's at a similar level that I've also done an edition for. There's some Scarlatti that I think would be excellent as some quick studies. There's a few Bach pieces, like some movements from some of the dance suites, like the French suite, or the French suites are probably very good in terms of the level. And then there's also some composers that I haven't played much by, for example, Tchaikovsky or Prokofiev, Shostakovich. There's quite a few pieces from those composers that I'm looking at. So there's no shortage of things to work on. So I think the real joy of all of this is that I just can't wait to get stuck into the next quick study project. And I can honestly say that I am quite surprised as to how enthused I am as a result of doing this. And I think it's just a combination of having really enjoyed playing something, having not had to spend a year learning it, practicing it for hours every day, doing all sorts of exercises and drills just to be able to get the notes. And perhaps also feeling like I've gained skills that will help me learn things faster and overall just increase my opportunities to play more pieces on more occasions. So I really, really encourage you to try this as well. I think quick studies, I think we're all aware of them. I think they are, something that you would have encountered perhaps at various stages if you studied music formally, or at least did it at school. But I think they're sadly overlooked, and something that we should definitely be trying more of, or